Welcome to the first episode of the Most Serious podcast. In this episode, we will be talking to a friend of mine, Sanjana, who studies in the Tel Aviv University at Israel. We will be talking about artificial intelligence, podcasting, and the future of tech. We will also discuss how COVID has impacted our lifestyles. Let's get into the episode now.
So, Sanjana, this is the first episode for our podcast. And first and
Amazing.
foremost, I just want to welcome you and I want to ask how it's going. What are you up to these days?
So I've been doing good. Just very much busy with, I guess, podcasts and new semester starting. But yeah, it's been good. How are you?
I'm also doing fine, I guess, because I'm still at home for starters, because our college is still going online. We haven't been on campus. And, just this is how I got the time and the idea to start this podcast, honestly, because I was bored of just sitting idle at home.
Yeah, I feel you. Sort of my intent at first. Like I wanted to start the podcast probably like a year ago. I should have done it during COVID. But I was intentionality going behind. But yeah, it helped kill boredom.
Yeah, I mean, also it helps to kill boredom, and I think for me, I find myself to be very fascinated by engaging conversations. I mean, if I connect with someone on a level and the conversation just keeps flowing and you kind of keep on adding fascinating stuff or some good ideas, it's kind of like the best feeling ever.
The flow of the conversation, I guess, is the most important element of any communication, right? Because you want to have a synergy with this person that you're talking to. So that's something that you'll probably get sent from, let's say, episode to episode. You'll see like how there's different energies involved with different guests and how different, like how you might have to switch from one subject to the other in the span of like 10 minutes. It's like a bunch of stuff you actually learn from podcasting is actually really helpful in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally believe you because I've been following, like, I saw a couple of episodes from your podcast and I kind of thought about having you as the first guest, mainly solely because of this reason, because I wanted to have someone like who has a bit of experience doing this stuff. Also because I thought of if I bring up some of my, a random friend or a colleague, so it would more of like a one-ended conversation because I would be trying to, like get the conversation going and telling them about how the structure of this episode is going to work, asking them questions. But you being a fellow podcaster, that helps me also because you know how the conversation goes and you have had guests on your show.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. Like as you ascend from that episode to episode, and you learn so much, you definitely get like a better grasp of podcasting. Like I guess we're at like 25 or 26 episodes by now, and I feel like I'm super good at editing in the sense that I'm hyper fast at it. Like I don't even like it's super fast for me now. Like I don't have to put so much energy into it, and yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that you learn like communication wise, certain phrases that might be helpful to, let's say, convert the flow of conversation in another area or in another situation. So I would like just by conversing, you learn so much. Like you will notice that when you do like podcasting too often, like it becomes addictive at one point. Like you just wanna exchange ideas and either receive the information you're trying to receive from the guests that you've brought on or engage in this dialectic or dialogue, and it becomes extremely addictive at one point of just this amazing synergies just clashing. So I guess I don't know, what do you think about, do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I can totally relate with you because matter of fact, I was listening to Joe Rogan's Demi Lovato episode that was released, I think, this week or the last week. I honestly love listening to podcasts, and I started this I don't think they were very popular like at the time when I was in my 11th or 12th grade. I don't think most of the people in India, at least, were listening to podcasts or were tuning. But I found certain speakers and like authors who did these audio versions or who just talked about life and who just shared their experiences. And I'm very fascinated by it because I feel the information exchange that happens during a conversation, and that just that teaches you a lot more because you're literally listening to a real world experience, and you're not just cramming up some random information that you won't use for the rest of your life. It gets very relatable also. So that's how I got into podcasting. I listened to Joe Rogan. I listened to there's one very famous Indian podcaster now. He's doing really good. His name is Ranveer, and he has some good content also. You should check him out. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff like what inspires me to listen to podcasts. And also, like you mentioned earlier, that while podcasting, you learned and it became kind of like an addiction to you, having conversations and listening to people's ideas, listening to their thinking process. I also feel the same way because listening to someone, you kind of get a look into how their thought process work, like how their brain processes stuff, how do they view this world, and what's their idea of reality and all.
I mean, I guess one of the reasons, I suppose, why I find conversations that happen on podcasts addictive is probably because I'm generally I'm the kind of a person who loves to be intellectually stimulated. And that's the high I like in life. So one could argue that I love having intellectually stimulating conversations. And so if I'm having that in excess, is it good or is it bad? I guess it depends, right? If you're receiving knowledge, okay, which is the only reason why, I guess the only intentionality that I wanted to be there as a, let's say, a priori judgment towards me starting this podcast, right? So it was that I should receive and give out knowledge. That's the primary, basic, first principle towards starting the podcast. And so, yeah, in a way, it's like I find it interesting how I love to like engage in multidisciplinary subjects. So it's not like I'm sticking to philosophy or psychology solely. It's like I'm also discovering, oh, what is quantum mechanics? What is happening with the cryptocurrency people? What is going on with the investment bankers? Like it becomes like I guess it correlates to the kind of personality you have, and maybe that's why I prefaced it by saying that I generally like intellectually stimulating conversations. So I guess the way I look at the cyberspace, which which we are very much present in as of the moment, and the reality and how I seem to go about my day doing virtual reality stuff and the actual reality stuff. I guess I try to give both of these realms very much the same preference at this point. I feel like the virtual aspect has definitely taken over after COVID. My life seems to be 50% in tune with reality and 50% in tune with virtual reality. So it's like 50%, trees and sun and friends and stuff like that, and 50% podcasts and what's happening on Twitter, what's going on Clubhouse, like just like a bunch of stuff there. And so this would constitute, let's say, all of my integrated reality, right? And so yeah, I see most of the things in terms of duality. Not to say that I'm a dualist or anything. I feel like I tend to just look at things from two different perspectives at all times. So the way I see life at the moment is, how do I manage reality well, and how do I manage this virtual reality, which is very much part of my own identity at this point. Well, so yeah.
I think that was a very appropriate view of I think that's true for kind of like most of the people in our generation. I won't. I would say most of the people that I know of in our generation, because especially during the COVID time, there's been a massive shift to this virtual reality stuff, if you would call it, not going by the literal meaning, because it kind of most of the time we are engaging in content that is through our screens, or where if you're listening audio that is present on the internet, and it has become like an what do you say, it has become an inevitable part of our life. You won't, I think at this point, you can't even try to comprehend a life without internet or without the virtual stuff or the cyberspace going around. Because I also certainly feel that I wouldn't say that my interaction with the real world and the virtual world is 50-50. I think it's still kind of 60-40-ish. Right now, I'm more invested in the real world, if you would like to call it. 60% I go out and play. I talk to people. I like to meet people also. But I don't feel ki there's a stereotype that is generally associated with the virtual world, that it's not contributing to you in a healthy manner or something. It's just how you discipline yourself, or how do you manage it. I think that's very important. What are you consuming? That becomes the basis of what would be the output of your the time you spend online or stuff like that.
True, and especially now that we are sort of moving in this age of artificial intelligence and crazy stuff with technology, like one has to think about, oh, how are you going to spend time in two different dimensions of reality, and how are you going to make sense of what you're doing in these two dimensions in totality? And so, of course, like it makes so much more sense to blame COVID for, let's say, 50% or this massive increase in terms of people switching from real communication via shaking hands and talking and going to offices, getting things done in person. And now it's being done on Zoom and on Facebook, on Twitter, like just wherever. It's on virtual reality. So one could blame COVID for that. That for sure that this pandemic has definitely accelerated this movement towards fast grasping AI of some sort. And so it's often like a question, and perhaps an ethical one always, that, oh, is this 50% use of me being on let's say virtual reality, and 50% me having some sort of a real communication in real life? Am I like, is this the right, first of all, is this the right ratio for your mind and your body? Because like physiologically you have to move, like we are moving in an AI direction, when people like to think that, oh, but Nick Bostrom's artificial super intelligence is going to be true in, let's say, the next 20-30 years. We'll have super intelligent agents within us in embodying robots, or just general intelligence surpassing agents or whatever, and they'll be ruling the world and everything. And I'm just like, I don't know, like how are we going to look about that when we are already 50% already on the virtual reality in, let's say, 2021, with the restrictions that have been imposed due to the pandemic.
That is actually very interesting, and I also think about this a lot, like the predictions people are making for the next 20-30 years. And I think the most important, or the most critical thing that I observed, or that I got to know from the books I've read, or the people I've listened to, is the rate at which technology is advancing. I mean, sometimes it's like technology is making strides forward, right? We're getting newer tech every day, we're making advancements. But at this point in this age, the rate is also advancing, the rate is also accelerating, because it's like you see progress in 10 years, and now that progress can somehow be like done in 1 or 2 a couple of years. Like we would have some tech and we would laugh about it 3 to 4 years later. If you think about, I think when we were growing up, we were like introduced to smartphones at the age of 12 or 11, I guess, or 13, I don't know. But now, if you think about that technology, even the technology we had as kids for smartphones, it seems obsolete because we had 2 megapixel cameras, or people had like they had storage spaces of 8 gigabytes. They had RAMs of like 2 gigabytes or something like that. I don't remember, but it seems very obsolete, and it's not very going into like too much past. So the rate at which the tech is advancing is also accelerating. So that leaves us, that mostly makes a prediction pointless, because I think I heard Elon say in an interview that someone asked him about what would be the future of tech looking like in the next 20 years or 30 years. He said that I can tell you one thing for sure, that the assumptions we would make right now, they would all be very baseless and pointless, because they would be achieved pretty soon than we think that they could be.
True, and I'm so happy in terms of like the timeline that we were born in, that we didn't really had like iPhone usage at 3 years of our existence, like, which is something that's been happening now with the kids being born in these generations. Like it is so good that I actually had to go out every day to school, to parks, to meet people, to talk to people, to be energized. And television was probably the only medium, let's say, in terms of virtual anything at that time that would be distracting, or maybe some sort of a video games or something like that. But like, I personally did not try to access the internet that much. Like, I guess I was 6 years old or something when I first hopped on to Yahoo and Google just to see what the hell was that. And when I was 10, that was the time when I was like, really, oh, this is interesting. And I think I was 11 when I joined Facebook. So I hopped on to virtual reality quite like on time. Like, I wish I joined much later, but I guess it gives me much more perspective now that I look back on it. Just like the way my experience, me being of a certain age and trying to navigate through the cyberspace, it was very interesting. The things I would do, I would like play like these stickman games and like weird stuff, like nothing serious, or like school homework, and anything to look up on Wikipedia. Like, there was YouTube, but there was like I wasn't watching Shane Dawson or any of the stuff that was going on YouTube. Like, I think I joined YouTube way later in my life, so I'm happy in terms of the timeline that I guess you and I we both were born in.
That is actually very much on point. Also, it kind of gives us a taste of both lives, if you know what I mean. It somehow, because we were born in a timeline that has radically shifted from a completely outdoor lifestyle, because having fun meant you're going out to the park, or you're going to a friend's house, or you're just talking with them, or you're playing random board games and stuff like that. So, and if you look at all of that stuff now, it seems boring naturally. You can't you can't sugarcoat it, you can't put it another way. No one would want to play a board game, or they would want to make small talk, or they would go in the park and play random games if they have the option, if the kids have the option of staying home, having their tablet in their hand, or just plugging in Xbox, playing some video games with their friends. So the life that we experienced before all of the tech took over, I think that was very different, and they would be like, I think that in the future they would be like some tales that grandkids listen to, and they'll be like, oh man, I don't believe you. This couldn't be possible. You're talking about an entirely different world that couldn't have existed. I mean, you can't be serious when you're talking about this stuff. So the world has shifted so radically in the past like 10 years. It kind of will make it absurd if we talk about our life experiences before 2011 or 10. People would be like, man, what the fuck are you talking about, and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I totally relate to you. Also, I thought, I mean, this obviously is a great conversation, and we just hit it right off. We didn't need to ask each other questions or stuff like that. So I thought about some topics that I wanted to get your views on them, and I think we also are in touch through social media. So I know that you and I have certain common interests. Like I know you follow philosophy and you're into artificial intelligence, consciousness, reality, and all of that stuff. So I want you to explain to me, or I want you to break it down to me. What's your view, and how do you comprehend artificial intelligence, or what's your understanding of the real world, or how do you understand reality or this world? Like, do you believe we are in a simulation, or what are just your views on all of this reality theory?
Yeah, so are we in a simulation? That's a good question. I haven't really given the simulation hypothesis that much consideration ever. Like it's such an argument. Like, why are we here? What are we doing? Where are we going? What is happening? There's so many questions that you have to answer, and you can apply these questions into philosophy, psychology, AI, anything, and it just makes all the sense in every different ways possible. So like I seem to be very fascinated with what's happening with, or what should be happening with, or what is probably going to happen with AI. Like it seems like a really good technical, but at the same time revolutionary, because like when you think about it historically, like it's like we were like from Stone Age to, then we went from that to, like, let's say, Industrial Revolution, right? And then what I can think of, maybe print revolution. There's so many different things happen, and now we're just completely moving towards some sort of a transhumanistic era possible, and especially with the Neuralink thing, right? Like I tend to think about Neuralink a lot, because I personally would love to explore how my mind would be symbiotic with the AI system, and how this weird subjectivity within me is trying to, or would, synergize with this objective AI mind. And then what results would that give to my memory, to my attention, to my everyday life? And is that transhumanism phenomena itself, like that we're essentially cyborgs now in the next 5 years? That's a really good question. And then of course you think about what Elon is doing with the Mars mission, and then this Neura, and like just everything in terms of AI. And then people are having conversations about Nick Bostrom's ASI, which is artificial superintelligence, which is supposed to be, the destructive AI as portrayed by, let's say, the popular culture, movies and books and everything. And so I seem to be very fascinated by the transhumanism or cyborg-like phenomena, because I think that's very much going to happen for sure. If not in the next 5 years or 4 years, definitely next 8 years. That seems like a very exciting thing to me. But when people start to talk about an ASI, I get kind of like pissed off, in the sense that, like, we have such a narrow version of AI right now. People think that we have, oh my god, AI. Like, we don't have that good of an AI right now. We have a very narrow version of AI, if anything. Like, the iPhone autocorrect is pathetic. Like, there's such shitty AI chatbots you can find online that doesn't even work. and you tend to think about super intelligence. Like that's a very far goal, if anything. Like I think we're probably going to reach Mars first. Like the Mars civilization shift is probably going to happen first. Then us actually having some sort of a super intelligent agent who's going to, beat us in terms of intelligence, of course, because that's what that is the definition of being a super intelligent agent, right? But also conquering us, and we will be the quote unquote slaves according to the popular culture narrative. So that seems quite like hilarious to me. But I think in terms of, let's say, AI, Neuralink and the symbiosis of mind with artificial intelligence seems like a very likelihood possibility to me.
Yeah, I certainly cracked up when you were talking about AI and how shitty AI we have right now, and I think that's true to some extent because we're still in the I would like to call it the initial stages of the discovery of AI because right now we're not even truly aware of its capabilities, to be precise, because we're kind of exploring it, and I still see a couple of years going into the work and people getting aware of people really understanding the meaning of AI. Because to most people, it's just like they've made up they've made up their monsters in their head that AI is a stereotype and it will kill you all. You'll become like monkeys to machines, stuff like that. But I think, yeah, I also believe we're pretty far away from that. And honestly, I find myself to be the odd one out when I talk to people about Neuralink and I discuss I talk about it with fascination because some people are like, I don't want to mess with my head. I don't want a machine or I don't want a chip integrated with my brain because it's gonna be I'm gonna be controlled by the computer or I'm gonna be controlled by the internet or stuff like that. I find myself to be very interested in knowing how it will integrate with our biology and would certainly like to experience it someday because I think I find myself to be open to new experiences because I think that gives a sense of meaning for life to me. I don't find going about the routine way and then just like as they were meant to be, or like people call it, this is the dream routine or this is the dream path you should follow, this is the stuff you should do. So I'm very open to that experience, but I don't think people are as open to it. I hope that's going to change. I hope people are not going to shy away from, or they're not going to build stereotypes around AI before completely understanding it. I hope they're going to widen their perspective on it.
True. I mean, for me, I think, this transhumanism thing seems very inevitable in the sense that we're moving so fast towards technology, even though we have a narrow AI, but still the advancements have been pretty crazy so far. And this very conception of Neuralink itself is quite, impressive in that regard. So I think, like when I think about transhumanism and why I say it is inevitable, it's probably because, like, imagine we get to a stage where everyone has an access to this device that you can put in your brains, or this sort of particular technological piece that you can just put in one of the nerves of your brain, like anything like that. And now you have a complete access to this artificial mind with your original mind, your qualia. And so how, and now that it is available, what does the distribution look like of such a device? And like, and if people are getting access to it, like how fast is it going to be that the entire civilization is going to become transhuman? Because like, yes, definitely we can assume that there's going to be certain anarchist movements where people are going to be like, no, we can't do the Neuralink thing, and like it's playing with the brain chemistry. Maybe religion is probably going to do that, and we're going to see another side of science enthusiasts just plugging Neuralink in their brain and fully transform into transhumanism. The question is, what comes after transhumanism? In terms of human subjectivity, right? Like, what happens to the human subjectivity when increasingly the objectivity is being imposed on, let's say, the human physiology and tied up with human psychology? So it's like you are, putting this device in your brain, which will affect your physiology and your biology and your mental health to a certain extent, without a doubt, because we start by the assumption that we know nothing about what's going to happen. So we're building, let's say, premises of this could happen or this could happen, or hypothesis, and then we decide, how it's going to work out. So of course there's going to be trials and stuff for Neuralink, right? And so when it finally comes out, the trials are going to happen again, but this time in a very large scale of population, and in a very exciting movement where the entire world goes from being, let's say, somewhat virtual to literally 50% physiologically virtual, and 50%, just to say that if this sort of symbiosis happens, maybe 50% we would still be using our own brains, if not the artificial one. And there's so many questions that you can ask about Neuralink, right? Because this is a device and it's supposed to come out, like what's going to happen. Like, I tend to think that transhumanism, even if Neuralink doesn't come out, something would come out in the next 10 years, which would try to take this human subjectivity or this qualia emotion or feeling sensation aspect of human life, and try to mess with it, with the objectives of the life. And I find it highly interesting as to how human subjectivity is going to evolve or in the next few years.
Yeah, the stuff about Neuralink is pretty interesting if you look about it from a neutral point of view. I also find it very interesting. Also, I think, do you know about the guy Lex Fridman? He is an MIT professor. I think he does research on AI, and I find his podcasts also like very engaging intellectually. I think he also provides like the way he talks about stuff, and also the thing I like about him is he doesn't complicate certain aspects of artificial intelligence, because if you see a person from the field of AI, most probably if you spend an hour with them, you'd kind of find yourself, I think, more confused than ever, because you would find that most of the concepts that you thought that you understood were now seem like out of your reach. But I like Lex's approach to AI and the way he discusses things. I'm sure you are also aware about him.
Yeah, I'm aware of Lex Fridman heavily. I've been consuming his content for probably, I think, since 2018, more or less. Like, since I probably started watching Joe Rogan, like about the same time I got into a bunch of podcasts, and his was one of the main ones that I watch even now. Yes, and I love the way he essentially structures the way he does his podcast. Like, he has a line of questioning and like a very formal, but at the same time, like if you see the episode with Tim Dillon, it's like informal and like formal. Like, he has a very I would say good vibe of just maintaining the flow of dialogue, and he just like has like this like, I don't know, I'm just extremely fascinated by the way he conducts his podcast. Like, it's like a discipline, like like the way he's able to actively listen but also contribute and then also follow up with a question. It's amazing. Like, for me, he's like, his podcast seems to be the most structured one out of everyone, But on the other hand, when we see Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan is this fun guy, comedian guy. Everyone knows that. And because he's like this comedian guy, he has this amazing excuse of prefacing, "Hey, I don't know anything. I'm a comedian." And then he can bring on, Roger Penrose or Eric Weinstein or just anyone and have like a mind fuck of a conversation and still be able to, you know, like still be able to process everything after the end of 3 hours of recording, that kind of like not being able to grasp much of what the content is being delivered to you, but at the same time being able to contribute to the conversation and being able to follow up with questions, not knowing most of the things is an art, so in that way I really appreciate Joe Rogan in the sense that he starts with this first quote unquote principle that we know nothing, that we assume that we know nothing, and we just build our knowledge upon it. And so even if we know something, which is a priori here, it just manifests itself with the flow of the conversation.
I think, yeah, with Joe Rogan, it's like whenever listening to his podcast, because the base principle, as you mentioned, like he starts with, we know nothing. So what that does is it puts the audience also in a very comfortable position to interact with the guest, or interact with how they interpret the meaning of that conversation. And Joe is like, he has such a fun vibe, and you never see that this podcast is getting too serious, or it's getting out of reach. Because if at some point you feel that the conversation is drifting away from you, the concepts are too difficult for you to comprehend, the Joe is always the guy who will just crack a joke in between. He'll just put out a very lame statement, and and that kind of puts the conversation back on track. And I found that today when I was watching the Demi Lovato episode on the Joe Rogan podcast, what was really interesting is I noticed this in most of his podcasts, that he starts with a very random observation or with a very random statement, and then he builds upon it, and that just kind of connects. It's like a tree going into many of its branches. It seems very natural, and you find yourself 40 minutes in, 50 minutes into the podcast, and then you realize you've been listening to it all along. And especially his 3 episodes with Elon Musk, I mean, they're enjoyable as hell, because it's intellectually, what do you say, stimulating, and at the same time he's talking to the world's richest guy, and he's making it sound very like easy for anyone who's listening to it. It doesn't sound like he's talking to some crazy tech billionaire who just builds rockets, who sends people on Mars. Because Joe does that thing for his audience. He puts them always like on the same platform.
Yeah, I think it's like the being like a podcast guest. How do you offer your peace of mind and your line of questioning to the guest or whoever you're talking to, right? So I think that has to be very structured. Like I found myself to like I listen to, so I would start my podcast with, yeah, welcome to the podcast, and like this is episode this, and like this person is this, and like how are you doing? And so that kind of like it becomes like this monologue or whatever. And then after that, the conversation just has to flow, so you have to actively listen and synthesize the knowledge which was already being delivered within what the guest has said, comment on it real quick, and then build something upon it which is interesting, and convert that interesting like mixture into the line of questioning that you're going to ask. So it's like a 3-part structure, right? Like you're commenting on what the guest has already said, you are taking something from that comment and adding some sort of value to that element of that comment, and then you're also following up with another question which seems somewhat relevant to what he had already said, what you had offered, and what he could be offering. So it's like it's like an art in that way, that how are you going to structure what are you going to be delivering in this, podcast, in terms of either your opinions or what you have learned, quote unquote objective knowledge, or anything in general. So I find the one has to know this particular area of podcasting really well. I don't know, like, what approach do you take towards that?
The intention through this podcast would be probably to structure my conversations better, because sometimes I find myself or the person I'm talking to, the conversation really flows like you're talking about stuff and you don't really have a structure or something. But there's one guy I also follow, Jordan Peterson, and I really respect his structuring of his statements. Even mere sentences that he speaks, they're well structured and they're very well delivered. He takes a second, he pauses. He'll not say something unless he totally absorbs it and he totally wants to deliver it. So I think from certain people like Joe or Lex or even Mr. Peterson for that matter, I really want to learn this art of structuring your talks. So that becomes a very, because it's a very efficient way to converse, because you're actually enjoying the conversation. Also, you're you're putting your thoughts and you're putting your ideas in a structured manner, or in a manner that the other person can comprehend easily, and it makes sense also because you're not here and there all the time. So that's definitely one intention that I seek to better from starting this podcast, I guess.
On like podcasting in general, or talking on this app called Clubhouse, very good for my social anxiety and conversational skills, because like I would often like really find it, like, get into a really hard time trying to get my ideas into let's say verbal dialogue, right? And so podcast kind of helps you with it, because you, at first when you do podcasting, it seems out of place, everything's like getting out of place, but when you give it time and when you do it a lot, then you get into it, and then you realize that it's interesting, and you actually let go of so many stigma, or let's say whatever you were holding on to before that was kind of eliminating you to be your authentic self at first. So this anxiety component tends to go away. And like I used to struggle with a lot of social anxiety, and still do to a certain very mild level now, but it was a major social anxiety disorder, and I struggled with it a lot. But due to like podcasting, and now also like making the podcast a video podcast, so essentially now it's also on YouTube. So that kind of gets away all of my social anxiety. It's getting rid of everything. So it's being as real as possible. I mean, that's at least the intention behind the podcast now, is to indulge in as many authentic dialogues, quote unquote, as possible. So like I found podcasting very good for anxiety, but also for conversational skills that I was explaining before, that you learn different phrases, how to connect different words, different thoughts, different ideas. You can also be into abstract ideas and abstraction, and able to creatively build upon different terminologies, and go from one idea to the other, and meanwhile also jumping from one science to the other. So it can get interesting in that way. The thing I like about Jordan Peterson is that his sort of Jungian approach towards, let's say, psychology in general. Like Jungian psychology usually gets shaded on, let's say, because of the approach it then tends to take, this collective approach, as opposed to this very individualistic, Freudian focused approach towards psychology. Like Jordan Peterson, just by let's say being a Jung fanatic. It seems to have like this amazing, authentic sort of aura about him, where he can deliver what he has in mind, which are essentially his ideas, along with the knowledge that he possesses. But in terms of a very interesting, highly captivating set of skills, that he's utilizing while delivering his lectures. Like, why do we start a Jordan Peterson podcast or Jordan Peterson lecture and sit through it all the way 3 hours? It's because of this element of immersion that he just embodies so well. Like, he's just such a good lecture guy. Like, I have exhausted literally all of his lectures on his YouTube at this point. I remember, I think I got into it like not that long ago, probably 7 to 8 months ago now. And just out of curiosity, like, I knew of the man, but I never really dived into his work. And I remember just one day clicking on one of his young lectures, I think from his 2015 personality course classes or something like that. And as soon as I clicked on it, and I had no intention of watching all the 3 hours, but boom, like, it happened. And next thing I know, I'm watching Jordan Peterson for the entire 2 weeks. And now I've exhausted like so much. It's because of this immersion aspect that he embodies so well. Like, he's able to deliver whatever he knows and whatever he thinks just extremely well. And maybe that's where the controversy lies, when people try to be controversial towards with the reputation that Jordan Peterson holds. Like, I think whatever the man's political inclinations are should always be separated by what the man actually symbolizes. Like, if he is a psychologist and if he presents this level of public intellectualism where he wants to deliver his ideas and knowledge, then I think he's doing it completely fine, and that should not be conflated with his political inclinations. Or even whatever he says about politics, I guess, is always taken out of context. Like, I think people call him Nazi and like whatnot, and I'm like, why? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Because like, I think he has that sort of aura to him that either compels people to come towards them or repulses people to go right out.
That is very much the understanding of Jordan Peterson. Like, he's totally this guy who won't shy away from his opinion, and he would particularly structure it, and he would deliver it in such a manner that if you have to debate against it, you have to come up with a very solid argument, because whenever he delivers something or whenever he says something, he has put so much thought into it, and it is usually so well rounded off with all his intelligence and the idea that he supports, that that the other person who is trying to argue or debate against it cannot even try to, like, not not agree with him. That's just how I feel about him, because he just delivers them with such power, I guess. Also, there's one very interesting guy. I think you might know about him. I'm reading his book currently. David Goggins. Are you aware about him?
Yeah, I am. David Goggins, the madman of fitness, right?
that guy is just. I mean, what do I say about him? He he's so motivating, or he's just like such a badass. He's so hard always. It kind of cracks me up. I was watching his video the other day. I'll send you the link. What he does in that video is he was telling people, what are you gonna do about your life, or why are you being such a crybaby about it. He tells people like he was about to go on a run, so he was just wearing a half sleeves t-shirt, and he said it's kind of like freezing out there, and I'm just wearing a half sleeves t-shirt. So what do you expect me to do about it? I'm gonna get over it. I'm just gonna go run. So I mean, that kind of approach that he has, it sometimes makes me laugh so hard. But at the end of the day, you gotta respect the guy. He has expanded the physical capabilities of a human being, and I just respect him too much for it. I'm reading his book currently. I'm sure you might have known about it, or read it.
I mean, what I know of David Goggins is more or less from Lex to Joe Rogan, like something like that. Because I remember, listening to, I guess, one of either Lex's podcasts or Joe's podcast where they were discussing David Goggins. And then I did open his Instagram for a second, and I was like, yeah, that guy is crazy, because it's also like the amount of energy he tends to execute, but also the motivation he tags along with it, like the crazy stuff that you were also saying about, yeah, I get the motivation and the energy and the fitness, but to what extent is this, over, let's say, stimulation or over physical exercise going to be useful towards your body? Like there has to be a certain extent or a certain level of, that you just have to do this much to be okay in life, or you just have to be this percent of motivational to be, able to navigate through life. And what David Goggins seems to do is like, oh no, you have to just be working 24/7, and that's all the motivation you need is to work and work and work. And I keep questioning whether that is healthy or not, and I think Lex also seems to be questioning that, because Lex seems to follow the same physical health exercises as he does. I think he had like few videos on it or so. And yeah, it's just generally very interesting to see a figure like David Goggins like do all this crazy stuff, and but also be able to, like not make people laugh but also motivate them in a weird way possible to actually, cross the limits and get their bodies or life goals, or just, straighten out their lives in a good way. And so I don't know if David Goggins like crazy approaches are 100% healthy or not. I mean, they of course seem to work because pressure, seems to be this amazing key towards unlocking success sometimes, because of, the over stimulation that comes along with it. But I don't know whether that approach to life in general is healthy or not.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. See, how I view Goggins is, I believe certain people have, like, they've told the world about the capabilities of the mind, or through meditation, they've experienced the limitless nature of our mind, of our consciousness. I view it as Goggins has done the same thing, just with the physical capabilities. He has proven, or he has just made everyone believe that this is possible with the body as well. You can over exceed your physical capabilities and stuff like that. But Goggins is just is just some, how do you say, you can't put him into words. He's more than words, and he's just a crazy person. But yeah, mad respect to him and for him, for the work he has done in his life and the way he motivates people. But yeah, I follow that guy, and I suggest that you should read his book also. It has been great so far. But yeah, the same thing. I think I was discussing this Goggins story with my mom also, and she also gave me the same answer. She was like, but is this really healthy? Is this required for each individual to hustle every time, and be on work and stay hard? Is his motto. He says stay hard at, at the end of every video, which becomes kind of very funny, and he ends up on certain meme pages, because you might understand like how people would take that out of context. But yeah, he is a very interesting guy. I think you should follow him more. You would find a certain sense of a different viewpoint for the world if you look through the eye of Goggins.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I had no idea that he had a book and everything. Like, I just thought that he was a fitness guy and motivation guy on Instagram or something like that. But no, I'll check out his stuff that he has produced. I mean, he seems to be a very interesting folk, a guy, like just to even hear from a second perspective. But yeah, I think I would love to exhaust his books.
Yes, I mean, you should do that. Also, I know that you are a football fan, and we've been talking about all the stuff, and we have to discuss football. I was thinking before this podcast that I have to talk to Sanjana about football. So, Aguero is leaving City. Champions League resumes this week. What are all your predictions? How are you feeling about your team doing so far? How much do you follow football? And like, what's going on with your take on the matches and all of the stuff that's happening?
So I've not been following like our Manchester United that much recently, but I'm kind of happy with the performance, more or less. Like I keep in touch with what's happening on Twitter through the stats and everything that they keep updating. Like one of the major reasons, and which is like so hilarious and so like weird of me to stop kind of like watching Manchester United matches, was that like whenever I would watch a Manchester United match, the score would either be 2-0, 2-1, or 0-0. Like literally any of these three. And this happened more or less, for years, because we would keep getting these managers, and they would keep keep delivering good matches for, let's say, the first 2 or 3 matches they do with the team, and then it goes back to the same thing, and then we kick out the manager, we get a new manager. Like it's been happening, and so that made me just like want to stop the matches.
With this, we wrap our first episode up. I hope you liked it, and we will meet you with another great conversation in the next episode. Cheers.